First, thanks a lot for inviting me to this event, and because I'm coming from Prague, I just very much appreciate what Eidolon Center do in this Central European context, and it is something, in my view, like exceptional. And I hope it's going to continue in something bigger and bigger. My today's talk is about is much more contemporaneous than Geoffrey Betchen's first lecture. I'm going to talk about analog-digital encounters in photography. That is, and I'm going to focus mainly on a kind of analog revival movement and analog revival communities, particularly Lomography, if you heard about this brand rather than a kind of category. I will explain it. And I will also touch a little bit a kind of experimental photographs and things like this. And just for the beginning, I'm not really sure if I'm fitting with this into the vernacular photography field, into this term, although it is very broad. Because at least when we take the images created by lomographers, by these analog media enthusiasts that engage with analog photography today, their images are much less about that has been or I has been there, but they are much more about I have created this image, and this is analog image, and this is with these imperfections and things like this. So the logic is slightly different. Yeah, but I'm going to read my paper just to fit the time. So the culture of analog photography has gradually given way to digital imaging since the 1990s, when the long era of film-based photography was pushed to the margins of the photographic practices and industry. From the perspective of the contemporary vernacular, mainstream photographic practices, and in this case I really mean vernacular as kind of amateur or maybe consumer on popular photography, these mainstream photographic practices, it might appear that old technologies like mechanical cameras, films, and chemicals have been replaced by new technologies, mainly and most importantly smartphones, then editing software, algorithms, networks, and most recently AI. In this regard, it is understandable why the relationship between analog and digital photography is often conceived in either or way, as old versus new, dying versus living, material versus virtual, as two incommensurable worlds that diverge technologically in terms of photography's conception, practices, social functions, and cultural meanings. Nevertheless, as we all know, analog photography has not entirely died, as it was often proclaimed in early 1990s. It persists in various modes in contemporary digital culture, at least from the perspective of so-called analog media revival. It even seems that the more digital technologies become a ubiquitous and commonplace part of everyday life, the more old analog media are being brought back to life. However, even this analog revival is dominated by either-or discourse, as analog media are understood in terms of counter-digital tendencies and nostalgia about what is being lost in the digital revolution. Analog photography is perceived as a manual, material, crafted, authentic, contemplative, and very importantly, slow media approach, or slow approach to media production and consumption that resist the novelty, ephemerality, oversaturation, and accelerating speed of digital technologies. It is even believed by many that doing analog photography can return us to a more authentic experience live, which is sort of paradoxical from the historical perspective, but I'm not going to touch it anymore. So in my talk, instead of this prevailing oppositional understanding of either analog photography or digital image, I am to argue that analog and digital photography do not contradict each other, do not live separately, but coexist, influence, and merge in many ways. Of course, some forms of analog-digital relationships are widespread, obvious, and banal, sorry for this term, like, for example, scanning and digitizing analog photographs preserved in libraries, archives, or, for example, family albums. Or to give an example of the opposite movement, that is the transformation of a digital image into its analog one version. We all probably sometimes print our digital snaps, create photo books, and hang printed and framed digital pictures on walls. But the relationship between analog and digital media technologies is technologically, aesthetically, socially, or practically much more complex than simply transforming an analog image into a digital one or a digital one into analog one. Consider a plethora of analog-digital remediation tools and practices, like, for example, Instagram filters or many other digital algorithmic retro filters, remediating visual features of analog films, materials, historical techniques, even like tintypes. It is a very recent app that can take images that looks like tintypes, including scratches, dust, and other imperfections. Apps simulating manual analog cameras, often named as retrocams, like, for example, famous Hipstamatic app, promising to its users, and now I'm going to quote from the promotional slogans, they are promising to its users beautiful analog photography, classical analog camera experience, simulated by awesome analog controls, and the possibility to fine-tune with a full darkroom editing suite. Hipstamatic, in fact, takes just normal digital photographs and doubles them with the algorithmically retro-filtered remakes. However, if perhaps users are a kind of analog extremists, if they want to be analog all the way, they can lock the camera in only retro-filtering mode and take and keep only Hipstamatic images. Further, some apps turn one's smartphone into an exposure meter, and some are designed for use in the classical darkroom. After making your smartphone safe, that is, adjusting the brightness of the display so it does not shine too brightly, these apps help darkroom printers to calculate exposure values, indicate appropriate development times for various black and white films and developers, offering them receipts for film and print developers, toners, intensifiers, reducers, and all you need when you are experimenting in the darkroom. And this is mainly the example of this bundle of apps designed by Digital Truth company located in the United States. New updates or entirely new apps and also devices, cameras, and all the things that are related to photography and platforms for analog enthusiasts appear almost every day, and it is even hard to follow what is going on in this field. Just a couple of days ago, for example, a new app and platform called Newgrain was announced across popular photographic journals like Petapixel or Do-It-Yourself Photography and others. Trying to address the fragmentation of the film photography community and building appropriate digital tool for analog enthusiasts, Newgrain aims to create a digital space for analog photographers where it will be possible to share photos and find reliable and up-to-date sources of information about film stock, cameras, labels, and labs, etc. They also aim to introduce a digital standard for analog shots, ensuring that film photos have important metadata in the kind of technical sense. These randomly selected cases or examples illustrate how analog and digital culture, analog and digital photography mutually intervene with one another. However, today I would like to show and argue that the entire analog photography revival movement is so deeply integrated with digital realms that to take analog photography necessarily requires doing digital photography, or that doing analog and doing digital photography is very often a kind of simultaneous gesture. What follows is a kind of small report of my ethnographic or ethnographic encounters with lomographers, part of my investigative journey based on doing, living, and researching lomography. I became lomographer just by purpose for researching this community about in 2018, already like 5 years ago, and I'm still continuing in this kind of research. And I selected this lomography movement because it is definitely one of the most vibrant communities of analog photography enthusiasts. And in fact, Lomographic Society International, just in the early 2000s, was one of the only companies that produced films and cameras, analog films and cameras, and that still like supported the analog community, because at the moment the revival is much stronger and industry is much more engaged in analog communities. But about 15 years later, lomography was very important for sustaining analog photography in our culture, in fact. And I will also wander through the landscape of the contemporary analog revival movement, searching for such practices, devices, and images in which analog and digital technologies coexist in an inseparable manner. The background of my first slide was a cutoff from the following image I created, as some of you may have recognized, using the so-called solargraphy technique. Let me begin with this technique, for it illustrates perfectly and very clearly an argument that I will try to develop further with other examples that may not be so clear and perhaps also not so convincing. I took this solargraph using a pinhole camera made from a low and wide can of dog-free antique color. It's just attached here. I attached this camera on the eave pipe of my house, and the exposition time was 30 days, mostly sunny 30 days, from September 29 until October 29 this year. And I used, inside the camera was the paper, aqua paper multi-contrast, which is the multi-contrast paper. And in my case, it was also expired multi-contrast paper, but it doesn't matter for solargraphy. Solargraphy is originally a technique for photographing the sun's path through the sky using a pinhole camera to expose black and white photographic paper for anywhere from a couple of hours to over a year or even a years. You can see the paths of the sun, not definitely 30 lines, but more or less 30, because some days were rather cloudy. The technique and the term solargraphy appeared in November 2000, when the first of these images were published online within a project called Solaris. The project was led by Slavomír Decik, Pavel Kula, and Diego López Calvín, who focused on experimenting with photosensitive materials, pinhole cameras, and long exposures to observe the sun. This project was subsequently followed by Finnish artist Tarja Trick's collaborative project, the Global Project of Solargraphy, which aimed to map the path of the sun from many places on Earth from as many places on Earth as possible. Solargraphy has been used both in artistic photography, mainly for its slowness, because it's very challenging, and in scientific research, where solargraphic images can provide information on the intensity of solar radiation, temporal changes in sunlight, and other factors affecting climate conditions, such as weather changes, which are manifested in solargraphy by the change in the colors of the sun's path. It is also, in my view, extremely interesting that you can get on the black and white paper the very colorful images. And I asked my colleagues at FAMU, who are much more knowledgeable at chemics to explain me this, and they just told me that if I have a couple of days, they will explain it to me why black and white paper has a produce color image, but it's because there are always some colors in the photosensitive layers, even on the black and white papers, and also this is the question of humidity and other weather conditions, but I cannot explain the details. And apart from artistic and scientific circles, however, solargraphy found great popularity, especially among those returning to analog photography and experimenting with various alternative photographic techniques and do-it-yourself interventions in the photographic process. Several discussions groups can be found on Photrio.com discussion forum, which is the largest online discussion platform for amateur photographers. Hundreds of images are available on Flickr, Instagram, and of course also on Lomography photo sharing site, where it became popular especially after an interview with Tarja Trick was published in online Lomography magazine about 12 years ago. In this amateur do-it-yourself stream returning to old media, is solargraphy mostly recognized as ultra-long or extreme time exposure photography. Nevertheless, the exposition time is not so important to my argument. The crucial is that solargraphs come into the being in a pinhole camera directly on photographic paper. And it is, if you look at the image, the sun literally burns into the surface of the image. It's like almost visible on the surface, like the modifications of the layer, physical. And the photographic paper is affected by the light without using any chemical processing. This is why these images remain continuously photosensitive. Exposing them to light may cause them to disappear permanently because of the darkening of photosensitive emulsion. In this state, when in the pinhole camera, they resemble the exposed negative film of photographic plate, waiting in the dark to be developed and fixed. However, in the case of solargraphy, the paper cannot be developed because it would turn totally black because the exposition is too long. It couldn't be fixed even because fixing we would lost a lot of details. It will almost disappear again, the image. And what can we do only? The image can only be preserved by scanning the exposed photographic paper, preferably in the darkroom, immediately after removal from the camera. The whole process of making solargraphy, as I at least practice it, and I think the vast majority of analog alternative photography enthusiasts do also, consists of the following steps. I am leaving out the do-it-yourself making of a pinhole camera, although this is definitely a significant step from a, let's say, discursive point of view or from the perspective of the lomography community itself. When you end the capturing process, you take the exposed paper out of the camera in the dark and put it into the scanner. The scanner needs to be set up in advance, as you have simply or almost exclusively one shot at scanning, because each additional scans reduces the quality of the image captured on the paper. After scanning, cropping the image, you invert it, you just use some kind of software, Photoshop or whatever. You need to adjust white balance, brightness and contrast, flip the image horizontally, adjust curves, use sharpening tools, and adjust vibrance. I just covered a few of these steps I just done with the image that was on my first slide. Sorry. After scanning, cropping image, inverting it, I already said this. These edits and adjustments can be, of course, very various. The point is to get an image simply that you like, as a creator that you like it. The next step in doing solargraphy is to publish the resulting image on a photo sharing site or social network, ideally accompanying the image by appropriate technical text and possibly a short story. And this is exactly what all lomographers do. They shoot just only negatives and then they never make prints, photographic prints, but they just only scan the negatives and as fast as possible just post them online just to get the reward with likes and things like this. And the next stage usually comes in the form of the received likes and brief and complimentary comments. It is also necessary to return to the exposed paper to the pinhole camera or somewhere where it will be forgotten in the total darkness or probably never looked at again. So solargraphy, therefore, is a very specific coexistence of analog and digital photography. Analog paper and digital scanning, editing, and online sharing. One without the other could not give the desired result. They could not exist unless they coexist in their specific technological symbiosis. Now, let me move to the Lomography, although the solargraphy is definitely the part of the Lomography movement. The Lomography movement began, I believe that most of you are familiar with this community, but just a brief introduction. The Lomography movement began with the foundation of the Lomographic Society International in the early 1990s in Vienna. Lomography means a photograph taken with the Lomo LCA camera. You can see this one example of the slide. Lomo is both an acronym and a trademark of the St. Petersburg plant Leningradskoye optiko-mechanicheskoye objedění, which launched the aforementioned camera in 1984. However, in the 1980s, in the socialist countries where the Lomo LCR was mainly sold, the photographs taken with this camera were just plain photographs. It was only thanks to Lomographic Society International in the early 90s that they became lomographs, and today images taken with many other cameras, like all different kinds of mostly plastic toy cameras, such as most famous ones are, except the Lomo, for example, Diana and Holga and all these toy stuff, are also considered to be part of the Lomography movement. That is the part, in fact, of the Lomography brand and Lomography lifestyle. And in my view, it was just the reason that the Lomography included all these different kinds of analog cameras just to expand or make bigger the production line, of the company. Today, the Lomography overlaps with the analog photography taken mainly with the cheap toy cameras and showing certain images, certain image specifics, especially in the form of various imperfections. I'm not going to touch a lot on the topic of imperfections, but to make imperfect image means in the lomographic community to make the perfect image, the excellent image, the most precious one. They love unfocused, vibrant colors, deep saturations, vignettes framing the shot, and good is that the Lomo LCR, because it's a very bad camera, it makes all these imperfections automatically. You don't have to do anything, you just press the button. And it is the same about the Diana and Holga and all these things. There are plenty of light leaks, mechanical scratches, dust. Lomographers never remove dust from negative. It's just something that is more or less forbidden. They also like multiple exposures, over and underexposed images, and overall snapshot aesthetic things. And very often there are even just individual albums on the Lomography photo sharing site where lomographers post just only first frames on the negative, those half exposed and half unexposed, and they are very precious because this is a kind of very strange imperfection. Lomography is, at least rhetorically, placed in opposition to the digital. Again, the contra-digital rhetoric is very strong, that the rhetoric that is coming from the brand. The LSI, recalling this analog-digital opposition, about 10 years ago launched a microsite with the digital prophecies, declaring in an expressive style that the digital present is over and that the future is only analog, and that we should leave the digital grind behind. Similar statements about the analog revolution are further dispersed across most of the Lomography platforms and publications, where digital photography is labeled as inauthentic, glossy, perfect, trivial, while analog photography, as I already said, are celebrated mostly for their authenticity and slowness and meaningful and contextualized experience of like taking the image. However, it is critical to note that the analog revolution could only be realized via digital means, which becomes apparent from LSI's, Lomographic Society International's Analog versus Digital Survey, which they organized about 5 years ago, that confirmed a deep engagement of lomographers with digital media, particularly smartphones. They are very much engaged in analog photography, but at the same time, they are very strongly, of course, who is not, they are immersed in contemporary digital culture. In this sense, the tense Lomography prophecy is very much telling, and it states, living analog is sexy, contagious, tantalizing, yet a little helping of digital technology is not a crime. Live offline, but share online. Lomography's success could not be possible without Lomography photo sharing site and, for example, the Lomography smartphone scanner that enables lomographers to transform their analog images as fast as possible into an online searchable digital image. This one was released about like 7 years ago, and about 2 years ago they have started to produce and sell Digitalisa Max, which is a little bit more advanced scanner for quick scanning of the negatives. However, my favorite example of the blending of analog and digital process is a work of lomographer Veriston. It is his nickname, and I don't know his true name, who unfortunately has not been active on the Lomography platform for several years. However, some of his albums contain photographs that are imperfect in both the analog and digital sense. As he states in the quotation, these negatives were pretty badly scratched, and I scanned them using a basic flatbed scanner, which added even more dust and scratches. So just to make image imperfect, he uses both analog imperfections that he even makes stronger through the digital imperfections caused by bad operating scanner. What I have described above within the analog photography enthusiasts community is starting to reach a much broader section of the photographic public at the moment, or at last 2 years, let's say. A great example of this flood of hybrid is the flood of hybrid cameras, which allows its users to take both analog and digital images with a single press of the shutter release button. Or, for example, devices that transform analog cameras into digital ones. First, some examples. Sorry, this is another one of Veriston. This was released about a week ago on Kickstarter, this contraption, and it is meant to be, it's called I Am Back film. And so it doesn't has been produced yet, but it was pre-announced on Kickstarter, and it is planned to be a 20-megapixel sensor in a film canister that could be simply inserted to your old analog camera. You can use this device instead of classical analog film. A similar you can find on the do-it-yourself photography platform or website. Is absolutely excellent for just tracing and monitoring these things that are happening. And there are a lot of do-it-yourself step-by-step manuals how to make your old analog cameras digital. But to my argument, even more important are those cameras that combine digital cameras or digital images with zinc printers, especially after the invention of zinc papers that are just made through the thermally, through the heat of or through the energy I'm not going to describe the mechanism of the zinc paper, but this technology allows to create very slim cameras that can, at the one press of the button, they create digital snaps, and then they make from these digital snaps these analog imprints on the zinc paper. And you can even choose, you can first shoot digital snaps, and then you can sort of choose which of them you will print on, which of them not. And this one from the created by Leica, it's going to be released early this November, just in a week. It's expected to be on the market. And Kodak released recently, about in the previous 2 years, several cameras of this kind that are different, that differ just only via the design. So at the moment, they have the line of 3 cameras that are like based on the same idea, just with one press of the button to create both analog and digital image. And my last example, among similar photo printing technologies using digital image to make analog one through photochemical process, we can mention the Paper Lab app project, which is much older than these cameras I showed on my previous slides. And in fact, I first saw it on the Analog Now Berlin Festival in 2018, when this app and device was presented. And you can just upload the app. It looks like this. That simply turns your camera into the projector. And then it was usually part of the gatherings of analog enthusiasts. The authors of this project, they built a tent darkroom in the place, and then people were coming to them with this app and their smartphones, and directly from the screen, they were just exposing the screen to the photographic paper, classical analog paper, and they were printing the images. And it's just another example of this merge between analog and digital. Yeah, I get lost in my paper at the moment. So, describing all these examples, I was not trying to say that we should forget that there are differences between analog and digital photography. Analog and digital certainly are different. But my point is that we should realize that these differences cease to play the role of opposites and antagonisms, but that they interpenetrate each other in a symbiotic form in the photographic practices, at least in the case of those who can be considered analog photography enthusiasts and within the frame of this analog photography revival. If you realize that, in words of Estelle Blaschke, for example, photographs are only carriers of images, that is, that the photographic image has always tended to peel away from the surface on which it was initially created or caught. Many other authors pointed to this thing, like Geoffrey, Michel Henning, and many others. Then it cannot come as a surprise that lomographers seamlessly oscillate between analog and digital photography, as their images very quickly change surfaces on which they decide to appear. Lomographers thus often de facto do not distinguish between analog and digital, as they are both an inevitable part of doing photography today. And just by the way, just about a week ago, I have found several lomographers who simply post digital photos, just snaps taken by their smartphones on this Lomography platform that is otherwise quite orthodox. So my final point is that the analog and digital do not contradict but encounter, and that's the conclusion. Thank you.